Good morning and welcome to the Mayor's News Conference. For this week's agenda, we'll be focusing on only one item, and that's regarding the launch of a national movement right here in Erie called the People's Supper. And now I'll turn it over to the Mayor.
Thank you, Renee, and good morning, everyone. We're very excited today with the announcement that we're going to be making about the People's Supper initiative that will be implemented over the first 6 months of next year. Over the first 6 months of 2019, we'll be putting this into action. This is such an important initiative, as Renee said, that it's the sole topic for today's press conference. As you've heard many times, the first thing my team and I celebrate in our 5-point vision for the city of Erie is our rich cultural diversity. I believe that the diversity of Erie residents is as rich as any community in the United States, and in fact, any community around the world. The problem is that we're not completely celebrating that great diversity that we have. Racial inequality and prejudice, unfortunately, still exist. Immigrants and refugees are sometimes not included and even mistreated. I've personally experienced this prejudice and mistreatment through my staff. But I believe that we can build an Erie where everyone is treated with respect, where we see, hear, and care for one another, and, as Martin Luther King said in his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, where we don't judge people by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. My team has been working with the People's Supper for the past 7 months to design a process that will encourage honest, open conversations that unite us in celebrating our rich cultural diversity. For almost 2 years now, the People's Supper has been working with various groups, with ordinary people, with schools, faith communities, neighborhood organizations, to overcome prejudice and bias. The People's Supper has conducted over 1,200 suppers in communities across the country. Their goal is to strengthen communities by healing the breach in interpersonal relationships that's caused by racial, ethnic, political, ideological, sexual, and religious differences. From January to June of 2019, under the leadership of the People's Supper, we will be bringing together representatives from every part of Erie's diverse community to build relationships by breaking bread together. This series of suppers is designed to break down barriers and deepen trust by helping people understand one another. Through the supper series, we will get to know each other's stories, which will improve relationships and understanding here in Erie. We will engage in conversations regarding subjects that we tend to avoid, identify fears and the barriers that keep us from working together. Our goal is to overcome what keeps us apart and implement solutions. No matter what our life experiences are, sharing honestly about race and identity makes us all a little bit vulnerable. But sharing our stories can also help each of us have greater courage to move forward in an intentional way toward a shared and equitable vision. To tell us more, I welcome to the screen Reverend Jennifer Bailey. Jen was named one of 15 faith leaders to watch by the Center for American Progress. She is an ordained minister, public theologian, and emerging national leader in the multi-faith movement for justice. She is the founding executive director of the Faith Matters Network, a new interfaith community equipping faith leaders to challenge structural inequity in their communities. Jen, welcome to the press conference.
Thank you all so much. It is an honor to be there, at least virtually, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your leadership and real guidance on this project. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you very well, thank you.
Okay, excellent, excellent.
See you too.
Well, and thanks to the mayor's team in particular. I see Renee there, Michael Outlaw, and others who have really been core guiding forces in shaping bringing the People's Supper to Erie. As the mayor said, my name is Reverend Jennifer Bailey, and one of the great honors of my life is to be one of the co-founders of the People's Supper. This project started 2 years ago in the fall of 2016, after the 2016 presidential election cycle. I think many of us noticed, whether you were on the right or the left, the deep divides that were exposed in that that moment in our nation's history, and we continue to see. And so my folks at Faith Matters Network got together with two other organizations to co-found this project called the People's Supper as a way of bridging the gap and the real ruptures that fray the ties that bind our democracy together. Since then, we've become a movement of everyday citizens, folks from teachers to librarians, police officers to others, faith leaders who come together to use the dinner table, this simple technology, right? The thing that each of us has to do to survive, as a way of building connections across lines of difference. I'm so excited that Erie will be one of those sites, and I am encouraged deeply, having worked with the mayor's office, seeing the deep commitment to celebrate the many diverse communities there in Erie, but the potential of this initiative over the next 6 months, not just to deepen relationships, but to translate and really think about concrete action steps we can move forward together to improve the lives of each and every person in Erie, Pennsylvania. I'm so happy my colleague Kay Scary is there to be with you in person, and I know she will tell you much more in much more detail about our initiative, but I'm just delighted to be here.
Jen, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for lending your expertise to what we're implementing here in Erie. We're really looking forward to starting the process. I'll talk about that in a minute. We have identified a core team of approximately 40 local residents who will assist us in facilitating the suppers. This evening, we'll embark on the next step in the process, which is to train the members of the core team, those 40 people, on how to facilitate a supper discussion, and those supper discussions, again, will start taking place in early January. Next, I want to welcome to the podium Kay Scary. Kay serves as the community manager for the People's Supper. She's an avid journaler. You can ask her later exactly what that means, but she's famous for it. Kay sees herself as made for life around the table. The table has been a space where she has learned what it means to be human and where she has seen profound connections made between the most unlikely people. Driven by a conviction that people should have consistent space where they are welcomed, Kay launched an open community meal in her hometown a few years ago, and that regular supper is still taking place. Please join me in welcoming Kay to the podium. Kay.
Thank you, Mayor Schember. What an honor it is to be with you all. I was reflecting as I drove to Erie and found myself deeply grateful to be able to be part of this work with you and to get to see such incredible dedication from the mayor's staff. I'm looking forward to seeing this series come together. We find ourselves in an age of loneliness, where we're more connected than ever and simultaneously more isolated. The issue is not just individual, but also collective. Structural racism in our communities means that we are all too often in the company of people who look just like us, and therefore we are all too often just in the company of people who believe like us. The racial, economic, cultural, religious, and geographic silos that result are further reinforced by a media landscape that perpetuates existing echo chambers. This often leads us to believe our worst stereotypes about the other. The People's Supper is working to be part of that solution. Social contact theory, which was originally developed in the 1950s and still upheld today, suggests that interpersonal contact under the right conditions reduces prejudice and bias among conflicting groups. Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt says, if you want to open your mind, you must open your heart first. At some level, we all know that we cannot rationalize our way into new beliefs. Haidt reminds us that if you can have at least one friendly interaction with a member of the other group, you'll find it far easier to listen to what they're saying and maybe even see a controversial issue in a new light. We know, too, that one of our biggest sources of resilience has to do with what psychologists call common humanity, the degree to which you see your struggles as part of the human experience. To feel less lonely in your stress, two things help, writes Stanford psychologist Kelly McGonigal. The first is to increase your awareness of other people's suffering, and the second is to be more open about your own. The core problem, then, is a relationship problem. It is not one that we can solve with op-eds, with policy changes, or by talking at each other from the privacy of our screens. it requires that we meet. The question then is how to create space for relationship building and a chance to hear the stories we otherwise may not get to hear in a way that feels authentic and meaningful and produces deeper empathy and understanding. We believe at the People's Supper that we're offering more than just an invitation to have a meal together. Here we invite people to go beneath the headlines to understand the real stories that have shaped who we are. We do this through shared meals and a short set of carefully crafted questions to break bread and share stories with one another. We have two types of suppers, what we call the Affinity Supper and the Bridging Supper. The Erie series will be a set of 7 suppers, 3 of which will be bridging and 4 of which will be affinity. The Affinity Suppers are designed to strengthen our individual and collective resolve by speaking about the truth of our experience from our particular racial and ethnic identities. Although it might seem counterintuitive, breaking out into affinity spaces based on common experience builds resilience and capacity to have hard conversations across lines of difference. Breakout suppers for African Americans, Hispanic and Latino Americans, and New Americans will focus on being a space of healing and reflection on the unique struggles of their communities in Erie. The breakout supper for the white allies will focus on building awareness of what it means to be white allies in the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion in Erie. Bridging suppers, then, are designed to create a space for story sharing across lines of racial and ethnic difference. Participants will gather across racial and identity lines to share stories about what brings us to the table, to tell and listen to truths about the legacies of racial injustice in Erie, and to explore what it means to be a community working together across our varied perspectives for the change in the city of Erie. Participants will sit at tables of 8 to 10, and each table will have a trained host facilitator who will introduce the questions and then lightly facilitate discussion. We intend to create spaces for people to see, hear, and to hold each other's stories and experiences. The final supper in our series will leave room for participants to reflect on the series as a whole and to collectively come up with some action steps to work towards a more equitable Erie where we are able to celebrate the rich diversity here. The series will culminate in a community celebration. Along the way at the People's Supper, we often say that we've learned that unity need not and does not mean sameness, and that it is indeed possible to bridge difference without compromising values and principles. We found that alienation knows no identity bounds, and that it's easier for people to describe a moment, recent or long past, in which you've been made to feel unwelcome, unsafe, or unworthy than it is to describe the opposite. We've learned that there's need to build bridges and that meaningful connection is not the product of who is around the table, but of the questions asked when people arrive. And we've learned that if you want to start to understand someone, you should ask them their story, because our stories are a lot more complicated than our world would have us believe. Again, it is such an honor to be able to be part of this work, and I could not be more excited about where this will lead us as a community and what this will mean for Erie in the years to come. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kay, and thanks again for making the trip up from Fairfax, Virginia, your home, to be with us for the press conference and tonight's training. Finally, I'd like to invite Michael Outlaw, my community liaison, and as I always say, my brother by another mother, to the podium. I'd like to invite Michael up to kind of talk about, give you just a little bit more detail on a personal and local level in terms of what's going on. Michael is actually the person leading this initiative. Michael.
Good morning, everyone. So this administration is committed to celebrating the city of Erie's rich cultural diversity, welcoming vibrant neighborhoods, world-class downtown and bayfront, excellent education for everyone, and abundance of family-sustaining jobs. This administration believes that for the mayor's vision to become a reality, a couple of things must happen. The first thing is to demonstrate the leadership of working together throughout the community. I am sure we all can attest that Mayor Schember has displayed that leadership the moment he took office and continues to do so. The next thing is having conversations about what makes us unique as a race, individuals, community, and city. Through these conversations, we will address last year's 24/7 Wall Street article, identifying our beloved city as the worst place in America for African Americans. That conversation will be comfortable for some and uncomfortable for others. But by having these discussions, it will lead to stronger relationships and development of action steps. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the most recent 24/7 Wall Street article did the same study, and our beloved city was not listed as the worst place in America for African Americans. Nonetheless, we still have a lot of work to do. We are up to the task. Our team is committed to creating the Mayor's Council on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion with representatives from the business, education, family services, government, media, arts and entertainment, faith communities to ensure that everyone is at the table working together to identify initiatives that serve all of us. The Mayor's EDI Council will allow for greater transparency, accountability, advising us on best practices, recruitment, hiring, and retention. For us as a community to move forward, we must be thoughtful, intentional, and strategic. By doing so, Erie will be a community where everyone feels like they belong, and our children will be proud to call Erie their home. Before I take my seat, I want to read a couple lines from Dr. Dyson's book, What the Truth Sounds Like. The Jefferson Education Society brought him to Erie, and it is RFK James Baldwin in Our Unfinished Conversation About Race in America. So allow me a few more minutes. So 55 years after Baldwin and Kennedy met and matched wits, we are in dire need of more talk, more insight, more wisdom, and yes, more productive conflict. If we are to learn from our past in order to move forward in the present, everything that hampered them hampers us. Everything that hangs on the horizon of hope can be usefully exploited now, including the willingness to talk to one another across the crushing chasm of color. We desperately need, we desperately need to return to that room to wrestle our way to uplifting resolutions to seemingly intractable problems. And if hope led people, despite their differences, to that room more than 50 years ago, hope will still be our guide in continuing that conversation today. In closing, thanks to the People's Supper, the core team, Reverend Jennifer Bailey, and Kay Scary. Thank you very much.
This is definitely an enormous undertaking. There's been a great team that's been working on this with Michael, and most of them are in the room here today. Of course, Renee Lamus, my chief of staff, has been very active. Kathy Rosdeck, our planning director, very active. Deacon Astari Carpenter, our liaison to the New American community, also been very active, and Aaron Wonke as well. So I thank everyone for their work on this, and particularly thank Michael for his leadership role here. We believe the conversations at these suppers will do three things. First, they'll break down barriers by engaging our diverse community in a meaningful conversation. Second, they'll empower all residents to get involved and make a difference. And third, they'll enable us to identify and implement policies and programs that make Erie even more inclusive and equitable. Thanks very much for joining us today. All the speakers will be available for interviews as we finish up here. Thanks very much.